Dao De Jing by Laozi is not just an ancient philosophical text, but a real instruction manual for managing one's life, relationships, and even business. Legend says that Laozi was a customs official and, intending to retire to the mountains, wrote this text at the request of his student. The book consists of 81 brief chapters that can be read as independent meditations. The Dao De Jing is not only a philosophical text, but also a practical guide to life. Its principles work in all areas, from personal relationships to managing large projects. The main thing is to practice these ideas in everyday life, and you will notice how you begin to move with the flow of life instead of fighting its current. Part 1. Tao Ching, the Book of the Way. Rule 1. The first chapter reveals the core concept of the Tao as the indescribable essence of being. The idea states that the true Tao cannot be expressed in words. It is the primal force that gives rise to all existence, yet remains beyond human comprehension. Understanding this helps to accept the limitations of our perception. When we try to define complex situations or problems, it is important to remember that our words and labels are only approximations, not reality itself. This allows for a more flexible and open approach to problems. The chapter teaches us to accept that absolute truth is beyond our understanding and to develop awareness regarding our limitations in perceiving the world. Rule 2. The second chapter discusses the principle of duality and the interconnectedness of all phenomena. It describes how the existence of one thing implies the existence of its opposite. High and low, good and evil, beauty and ugliness arise only because of each other. Understanding this interconnectedness helps to accept the world in its entirety. In business, success is impossible without the risk of failure. By accepting this connection, entrepreneurs can view failures as an inherent part of the path to success. The chapter shows that all phenomena are closely linked and depend on each other, and to achieve harmony, it is necessary to accept this fact. Rule 3. The third chapter speaks of the importance of modesty and simplicity in governance. It emphasizes that the best leaders act subtly, without striving for fame and wealth. They create conditions for the development of subordinates, allowing them to manifest their abilities. This approach leads to the natural prosperity of society. A good leader will not constantly control the team, but will create a comfortable working environment where every employee can realize their potential. The chapter teaches that true leadership lies in creating conditions for the development of others, not in demonstrating power. Rule 4. The fourth chapter continues the reflection on the nature of the Tao as an infinite force. The Tao is described as the eternal source of all existence, which nourishes the world and remains unchanged. Despite its apparent emptiness, it contains inexhaustible power. Understanding this helps to see the deep value in simple things. In everyday life, simple moments and actions that are actually the basis of our life, such as health, relationships, and basic skills, are often underestimated. The chapter reminds us of the value of the simple and mundane, which contains great power. Rule 5. The fifth chapter discusses the concept of detachment as a form of wisdom. It describes how the sage relates to all phenomena equally, without attaching to anything. He understands that nature acts impartially and follows this law. This approach allows for maintaining inner peace and objectivity. In stressful situations, maintaining a detached attitude helps to make decisions more rationally, without succumbing to emotions. The chapter teaches us to develop the ability for objective perception of the world, avoiding the extremes of attachment and aversion. Rule 6. The sixth chapter speaks of the eternal force and its ability to be reborn. The eternal force is like the spirit of the valley. It is a source of life and renewal that never runs dry. This force sustains all living things and provides the opportunity for constant rebirth, just as nature always restores itself after destruction. Understanding this helps develop faith in one's own possibilities for rebirth. After a difficult period in life, it is important to remember that just as nature awakens in the spring after winter, so too can a person recover from any losses and start anew. The chapter teaches us to believe in our ability for rebirth and understand that all processes in the world are cyclical. Rule 7. The seventh chapter discusses the importance of self-sacrifice and modesty. Those who put the interests of others above their own receive more than those who think only of themselves. The less a person cares about their own preservation, the safer their existence becomes, as they harmonize with the surrounding world through service to others. In business, companies that focus on satisfying the needs of clients and developing employees are more successful than those that pursue only their corporate interests. The chapter shows that true well-being is achieved through service to others, not through the selfish pursuit of personal success. Rule 8. The 8th chapter compares the sage to water. Water occupies the lowest places, where others do not want to be, and thus becomes necessary for everyone. The sage follows this principle, choosing a modest position and helping others without expecting a reward. Successful leaders often work from the shadows, giving credit to their teams, and this is what makes them truly significant to the collective. The chapter teaches us to value modesty and the willingness to occupy a low position as a path to true greatness. Rule 9. The 9th chapter warns against excess. An overfilled vessel is easily overturned, and the more we strive to gain, the more we risk losing. Wisdom lies in knowing when to stop and not striving for endless accumulation. In financial matters, it is important to know when enough is enough and not try to earn too much, which can lead to losses. Instead, one should be content with a sufficient level of well-being. The chapter reminds us of the importance of moderation and awareness in our desires and aspirations. Rule 10. The 10th chapter asks questions about unity and harmony. The chapter explores the possibility of achieving complete unity between a person's spiritual and physical beginnings. This unity allows for achieving the highest level of development in harmony with the world. Practically, this means working on oneself in all aspects. To achieve professional goals, intellectual development alone is not enough. It is also necessary to work on one's emotional state, physical health, and spiritual growth. The chapter emphasizes the need for a comprehensive approach to self-development as a person, taking into account all aspects of human nature. Rule 11. The 11th chapter reveals the value of emptiness and space. This chapter describes that it is the emptiness inside objects that makes them useful. For example, clay forms a vessel, but its usefulness lies in the emptiness within. Understanding this helps to see value in absence, not just presence. In planning the workday, it is important to leave time for rest and reflection, as it is precisely these empty periods that allow the rest of the time to be used effectively. The chapter teaches us to value emptiness and space as a source of opportunities and development. Rule 12. The 12th chapter warns against excessive pleasures. It says that excessive indulgence in gustatory, visual, and auditory pleasures distracts from the true nature of a person. Wisdom lies in the ability to limit one's desires for the sake of preserving inner harmony. Modern humans are often subject to information, noise, and constant content consumption. Reducing time spent in front of screens can significantly improve the quality of life. The chapter reminds us of the importance of moderation in pleasures for maintaining inner balance. Rule 13. The 13th chapter discusses the attitude toward success and failure. The chapter speaks of the need to relate equally to success and failure, wealth and poverty. True wisdom lies in the realization that our true essence does not depend on external conditions. In business, it is important to remain calm, both when making a profit and incurring losses, accepting all events as part of the process. The chapter teaches us to develop independence from external circumstances to achieve inner stability. Rule 14. The 14th chapter continues the description of the nature of the Tao. It is described here that the true Tao cannot be seen with the eyes, heard with the ears, or grasped by the mind. It transcends our senses and concepts, being the basis of all existence. This understanding helps to accept the limitations of human perception. When we encounter a situation that goes beyond our understanding, it is important to remember that there are deeper forces that we cannot fully grasp. The chapter emphasizes the need for modesty before the grandeur of the universe and the acceptance of the unknown. Rule 15. The 15th chapter describes the qualities of ancient sages. This chapter lists the qualities of true sages. They are deep, attentive, cautious, strong, and diligent. Their behavior is similar to water, which adapts to any conditions while retaining its nature. A good leader must be flexible and adaptive, like water, capable of finding optimal solutions in different situations. The chapter provides a model to emulate in developing the qualities of a true sage who lives in harmony with the world. Rule 16. The 16th chapter speaks of the importance of returning and knowing the origin. This chapter emphasizes that all things arise from non-being and return there. Understanding this cycle helps to realize the deep nature of all existence and learn to live in harmony with these laws. The sage learns to find stillness in movement and permanence in change. In the learning process, it is important to periodically return to the basics to consolidate knowledge, even when it seems that one has progressed further. The chapter teaches us to see the eternal behind apparent changes and find strength in this. Rule 17. The 17th chapter discusses different types of rulers. It describes 4 types of rulers: those whom people barely notice, those who are loved and praised, those whom people fear, and those against whom people revolt. The best option is governance, so natural that people do not even realize the ruler's presence. In modern management, the most effective leaders are those who create conditions for the team's independent work, without imposing control. The chapter shows that true leadership lies in the ability to create favorable conditions for the development of others. Rule 18. The 18th chapter speaks of the consequences of losing the Tao. When the Tao is lost, morality appears. When sincerity is lost, the formal following of rituals arises. This indicates that external rules and norms appear where inner harmony has been lost. In companies where there is no trust between employees, formal regulations and rules begin to be actively implemented, which may indicate problems in the corporate culture. The chapter reminds us of the importance of preserving inner harmony instead of focusing only on external rules. Rule 19. The 19th chapter proposes the rejection of artificial values. The chapter calls for the rejection of wisdom as deception and of humanity and righteousness as artificial concepts. Instead, one should return to simplicity and naturalness. This helps restore a genuine connection with the world. In relationships, it is important to be sincere and natural, rather than trying to conform to others' ideas of correct behavior. The chapter teaches us to value naturalness and authenticity above artificial social norms. Rule 20. The 20th chapter expresses the striving for unity with the Tao. It speaks of how the sage distances himself from mass delusions and strives for unity with the Tao. He enjoys inner harmony, even if he is not understood by those around him. This state is similar to returning to childlike innocence. In creative activity, it is important to follow one's inner voice, even if it deviates from generally accepted standards. The chapter shows the path to true freedom through detachment from public stereotypes and unification with one's own nature. Rule 21. The 21st chapter reveals the essence of the Tao through the symbol of the feminine principle. In this chapter, the Tao is described as a mysterious force, similar to the feminine principle. It is deep and incomprehensible, but it is from it that all existence arises. Understanding this helps to accept the power of softness and inner nature. In leadership, it is important to develop qualities traditionally associated with the feminine principle: attentiveness, the ability to listen, and adaptability to the situation. The chapter teaches us to value softness and depth instead of striving for force and external manifestation. Rule 22. The 22nd chapter speaks of the advantages of modesty and the disadvantages of self-aggrandizement. It describes that true greatness is achieved through modesty and the willingness to occupy a low position. Those who strive for fame and power often fail, while those who remain modest receive more. In a career, it is better to focus on real achievements than on external indicators of success, such as titles or awards. The chapter shows that true success comes through modesty and service, not through self-assertion. Rule 23. The 23rd chapter discusses the nature of permanence and change. The chapter speaks of how all things are in constant motion, but behind these changes stands the eternal force of the Tao. The sage learns to accept these changes as part of life. In business, it is important to understand that markets are constantly changing, but the basic principles of management remain unchanged. The chapter teaches us to see the eternal behind time and to accept change as a natural part of life. Rule 24. The 24th chapter warns against excess and artificiality. It describes the consequences of striving for artificiality and excess. Those who try to appear to be what they are not usually fail. True strength lies in naturalness. In social media, it is important to be oneself rather than creating an idealized image that can lead to disappointment. The chapter reminds us of the importance of naturalness and authenticity, in contrast to artificial representations. Rule 25. The 25th chapter describes the 4 great beginnings of the universe. This chapter speaks of 4 levels of being: the Tao, heaven, earth, and man. Each level depends on the previous one, and all are united into a single system. Understanding these interconnections helps to live in harmony. In ecology, it is important to understand that man is part of nature, not its master, and must live in accordance with the laws of nature. The chapter shows a holistic picture of the world, where every element is connected to and dependent on others. Rule 26. The 26th chapter speaks of the importance of stillness and heaviness. It describes that heaviness is the basis of lightness, and stillness is the source of movement. The sage maintains stillness even in motion, which makes his actions more effective. In travel, it is important to have a base camp to which one can return for rest. Just as in life, one needs a place for rest and meditation. The chapter teaches us to value stillness and stability as the foundation for active actions. Rule 27. The 27th chapter discusses the importance of hidden qualities. The sage acts in such a way that his actions remain unnoticed by those around him. This is similar to a skillful chariot driver who leaves tracks that quickly disappear. True mastery lies in the ability to achieve goals without external manifestations. In project management, it is more effective to create conditions for the team's independent work than to constantly control every step, which makes leadership less visible but more effective. The chapter teaches us to value hidden efforts and understand that true power often manifests through the absence of visible impact. Rule 28. The 28th chapter speaks of the necessity of maintaining simplicity. It describes how the sage maintains the state of unhewn wood, that is, natural simplicity, even having reached the heights of development. This allows him to remain flexible and adaptive. Understanding this helps avoid stagnation and loss of flexibility. In software development, it is important to keep the code clean and simple, even when adding new functions, so that the system remains manageable. The chapter reminds us of the importance of preserving simplicity and naturalness, even in the stages of development. Rule 29. The 29th chapter warns against striving to change everything. This chapter says that attempts to radically change the world usually lead to the opposite results. All things have their nature, and wisdom lies in the ability to work with this nature, not against it. In organizational reform, it is important to consider the existing culture and structure rather than trying to change everything fundamentally. The chapter teaches us to accept things as they are and work with their nature instead of fighting it. Rule 30. The 30th chapter speaks of the consequences of forceful methods. It describes the dangers of using force to achieve goals. Forceful methods can yield temporary results, but in the long run lead to destabilization. Wisdom lies in the use of gentle methods. In conflict situations, it is better to use negotiation and the search for compromise than the application of pressure or threats. The chapter shows that softness and flexibility are often more effective than force and rigidity. Rule 31. The 31st chapter discusses the nature of war and victory. This chapter says that even victory in war should be met with caution, as it carries the seeds of future problems. True victory is when there is no need for conflict. In business competition, it is better to achieve success through cooperation than through the destruction of competitors. The chapter teaches us to see the deeper consequences of our actions and strive for peaceful solutions. Rule 32. The 32nd chapter describes the properties of water as a symbol of the Tao. Here, water is presented as a model of following the Tao. It occupies the lowest places, nourishes all living things, and possesses amazing strength through softness. Understanding this helps to develop similar qualities in oneself. In leadership, it is important to be like water, support the team while remaining in the shadows, and have strength through softness and flexibility. The chapter encourages us to develop the qualities of water softness, adaptability, and support for others. Rule 33. The 33rd chapter discusses the nature of true strength. This chapter says that true strength lies not in victory over others, but in understanding oneself. The one who knows his limits and possibilities possesses true power. Understanding this helps to develop self-awareness and inner strength. In sports, it is important to know one's weak points and work on them, rather than simply striving to defeat others, which makes the training process more effective. The chapter teaches us to value self-knowledge above external victories and achievements. Rule 34. The 34th chapter describes the all-pervading nature of the Tao. Here, the Tao is presented as a force that permeates all existence without exception. It acts subtly, but its influence is felt everywhere. Understanding this helps to see the unity of all existence. In ecosystems, even small changes can have a huge impact on the entire system, which demonstrates the principle of all-pervading connection between all elements. The chapter shows us the integrity of the world and the interconnectedness of all its parts. Rule 35. The 35th chapter speaks of the attractive force of the Tao. This chapter describes how the Tao attracts people with its depth and mystery. It is like music or delicacies that draw people in. Understanding this helps to develop interest in studying the higher laws of life. In spiritual development, constant practice and immersion in teachings, which may initially seem complex, but reveal their beauty over time, are important. The chapter teaches us to find attraction in deep knowledge and develop an interest in studying it. Rule 36. The 36th chapter reveals the paradoxical methods of governance. It describes opposing methods of achieving goals. To strengthen, one must weaken. To take, one must give. This approach is based on understanding the deep laws of development. Understanding this helps to apply unconventional management methods. In personnel management, it is sometimes better to grant employees more freedom so that they become more responsible and independent. The chapter suggests using opposing methods to achieve desired results. Rule 37. The 37th chapter concludes the first part of the book, speaking of non-action, Wu Wei. This chapter describes the principle of non-action, when the sage achieves goals without active intervention, allowing things to develop naturally. This is the highest level of governance, which is based on understanding the nature of things. In raising children, it is important to create conditions for their independent development, rather than constantly controlling every step. The chapter teaches us to trust the process and allow things to develop naturally, which is often more effective than active intervention. Overall, conclusion for part 1, the first part of the Dao De Jing deeply reveals the essence of the Tao as the fundamental force of the universe, teaching us to see harmony in opposites and find wisdom in simplicity and naturalness. It teaches us to accept the world in its entirety, develop modesty and flexibility, and act through understanding the nature of things rather than coercion. The basic principles of the first part help to cultivate inner harmony and effective management of both oneself and others, offering a unique approach to life through the prism of eternal laws of being. These ideas create a solid foundation for further study of the practices of moral development, presented in the second part of the treatise. Part 2, De Jing, the Book of Virtue. Rule 38. The 38th chapter discusses the differences between the Tao and morality. It describes that true adherence to the Tao occurs naturally without coercion. When people lose this naturalness, formal rules of morality and righteousness appear. Understanding this helps to distinguish authentic qualities from artificial norms. In relationships with colleagues, it is better to rely on sincere human connections than on formal corporate rules of conduct. The chapter teaches us to value natural qualities above formal norms and rules. Rule 39. The 39th chapter speaks of unity through diversity. This chapter describes the various levels of existence: heaven, earth, spirits, rulers, but all are united by the single force of the Tao. This shows how diversity exists within unity. Understanding this helps to accept differences as part of the whole. In teamwork, it is important to understand that different roles and functions complement each other, creating a single successful project. The chapter shows us how diversity is an integral part of unity. Rule 40. The 40th chapter reveals the nature of movement. It says that movement arises from stillness and existence from non-being. All processes are based on the interaction of opposing principles. Understanding this helps to see the deep mechanisms of development. In innovation, new solutions often arise from analyzing what is lacking in existing products or processes. The chapter teaches us to see movement as the result of the interaction of opposing principles. Rule 41. The 41st chapter discusses various approaches to the Tao. This chapter describes 3 types of people who encounter the Tao: those who joyfully accept it, those who use it with doubt, and those who laugh at it. All these reactions are part of the process of knowing. Understanding this helps to be tolerant of different points of view. When introducing new technologies in a company, there will always be employees with different levels of acceptance of the innovations. And it is important to consider all these opinions. The chapter teaches us to accept different levels of understanding and be tolerant of different reactions. Rule 42. The 42nd chapter describes the foundations of the universe. It says that the Tao gives birth to 1, 1 gives birth to 2, 2 gives birth to 3, and 3 gives birth to all things. This describes the basic mechanism of creation of the universe. Understanding this helps us see the fundamental principles of being. In any system, basic elements can be identified that give rise to more complex structures, whether they are computer programs or biological organisms. The chapter reveals the main principles of the creation and development of all existence. Rule 43. The 43rd chapter speaks of the power of softness. This chapter describes how the softest can overcome the hardest. Invisible forces can penetrate where visible obstacles have no passage. Understanding this helps to use softness as a form of power. In negotiations, a gentle approach is often more effective than a hard demand, especially when long-term agreements need to be reached. The chapter teaches us to see strength in softness and use it to achieve goals. Rule 44. The 44th chapter discusses the choice between material and spiritual. This chapter says that it is better to lose the external for the sake of preserving the internal. Material wealth is not worth the soul or health. Understanding this helps to make the right choices in life. When choosing between a highly paid but unhealthy job and a less profitable but health-favorable activity, the latter should be preferred. The chapter teaches us to value the spiritual and internal above the material and external. Rule 45. The 45th chapter reveals the power of the hidden. It describes that true wisdom often manifests through visible simplicity and unobtrusiveness. What seems empty or insufficient may actually be full and sufficient. Understanding this helps to see deep value where others do not notice it. In design, a minimalist approach is often more effective than being overloaded with details, creating more space for imagination. The chapter shows us that true power is often hidden behind visible simplicity. Rule 46. The 46th chapter speaks of the consequences of excess. This chapter describes the dangers of abundance and war when people lose a sense of measure. The sage knows when to stop and does not strive for endless growth. Understanding this helps to avoid the destructive consequences of excess. In business development, it is important to know when the optimal scale has been reached and not strive for endless expansion, which can lead to a loss of control over processes. The chapter teaches us to realize the importance of measure in all aspects of life. Rule 47. The 47th chapter discusses knowing without traveling. It says that one can know the world without leaving one's home. Deep understanding comes through internal meditations and observations, not through external exploration. Understanding this helps to develop intuition and inner wisdom. For making important decisions, it is often more useful to turn to one's inner voice than to gather huge volumes of external information. The chapter teaches us to trust our inner experience and intuition. Rule 48. The 48th chapter speaks of reducing knowledge to attain the Tao. This chapter describes that the path to the Tao lies through the gradual reduction of artificial knowledge and a return to natural simplicity. This requires constant practice in self-knowledge. Understanding this helps to develop genuine wisdom. In learning, it is sometimes useful to discard complex theories and return to the basic principles to see the situation more clearly. The chapter encourages us to follow the path of simplification to achieve genuine understanding. Rule 49. The 49th chapter discusses the qualities of a true ruler. It describes the qualities of the ideal ruler. He accepts people as they are and cares for them without imposing his views. He acts through an understanding of human nature. Understanding this helps to develop true leadership. A good leader will adapt their management style to the specifics of the team, rather than demanding the same behavior from everyone. The chapter teaches us to develop flexibility and acceptance as key leadership qualities. Rule 50. The 50th chapter discusses the issues of life and death. It says that those who understand the Tao live longer, not because they fear death, but because they live in harmony with nature. They avoid dangerous situations not out of fear, but thanks to a deep understanding of the laws of life. Understanding this helps to live more consciously. In everyday life, many problems can be avoided by simply following common sense and intuition, rather than seeking thrills at any cost. The chapter teaches us to value life through conscious adherence to natural laws. Rule 51. The 51st chapter reveals the role of the Tao in world creation. All things arise from the Tao and develop thanks to its force. It gives birth to everything, but does not claim the results for itself. Understanding this helps to develop modesty and gratitude. Successful leaders often work from the shadows, giving credit to their teams, and this is what makes them truly significant to the collective. The chapter shows us an example of true creation without attachment to the result. Rule 52. The 52nd chapter speaks of returning to the origin. It describes that all things have their roots and beginnings. The sage maintains a connection with these beginnings, even when at the height of development. This helps him remain stable and flexible. Understanding this helps to preserve the fundamentals even while developing. In scientific activity, it is important to periodically return to fundamental principles, even when engaged in advanced research. The chapter teaches us to maintain a connection with the basics to achieve stable development. Rule 53. The 53rd chapter discusses the path of correct governance. This chapter says that the wise ruler follows the natural path of development without imposing artificial changes. He protects the people from destructive influences. Understanding this helps develop effective management methods. In environmental management, it is better to support natural restoration processes than to apply artificial methods that can disrupt a fragile balance. The chapter suggests using natural management methods instead of coercion. Rule 54. The 54th chapter reveals the principles of durable construction. It describes that true durability is built on reliable foundations. What is well-rooted can withstand any trials. Understanding this helps to create strong foundations in all endeavors. In business building, it is important to create a reliable foundation through clear values and principles that will support the company in difficult times. The chapter teaches us to create strong foundations for long-term success. Rule 55. The 55th chapter speaks of development through naturalness. It describes that true development occurs through natural processes, similar to how a newborn child possesses natural strength. Artificial development methods are often contrary to nature. Understanding this helps to develop naturally. In education, it is better to allow children to develop according to their own pace and interests than to impose standard curricula. The chapter teaches us to trust natural processes of development instead of artificial intervention. Rule 56. The 56th chapter discusses the qualities of the sage. It describes the qualities of the true sage. He does not display his knowledge, does not value material wealth, and does not strive for fame. His wisdom lies in the ability to remain unobtrusive. Understanding this helps to develop genuine wisdom. In scientific activity, true experts often remain behind the scenes, allowing others to use their knowledge for general development. The chapter teaches us to see wisdom in modesty and unobtrusiveness. Rule 57. The 57th chapter speaks of methods of governance. This chapter says that the best way to govern is with minimal interference. The fewer laws and prohibitions, the calmer society becomes. Understanding this helps to develop effective management methods. In modern companies, the practice of minimizing rigid rules and granting employees more freedom often leads to better results. The chapter suggests using gentle methods of governance instead of strict control. Rule 58. The 58th chapter discusses the consequences of actions. It describes that any action has its consequences, which may be opposite to the desired ones. Wisdom lies in the ability to foresee these consequences. Understanding this helps to make more conscious decisions. When making environmental decisions, it is important to consider the long-term consequences, even if the short-term results seem positive. The chapter teaches us to foresee the consequences of our actions for wiser decisions. Rule 59. The 59th chapter reveals the principles of preservation. This chapter says that true preservation occurs through natural processes and a deep understanding of the nature of things. This requires constant practice and attention. Understanding this helps to preserve important qualities and achievements. In preserving cultural heritage, it is important to use methods that support the natural structure of objects, rather than replacing them with artificial materials. The chapter teaches us to preserve through understanding the nature of things. Rule 60. The 60th chapter speaks of managing great forces. It describes how one should deal with great forces through gentleness and respect for their nature. The use of force or violence usually leads to the opposite results. Understanding this helps to work effectively with powerful systems. In managing large projects, it is better to use flexible methodologies than to try to strictly control all processes. The chapter teaches us to work with great forces through gentleness and understanding. Rule 61. The 61st chapter discusses the principles of harmony. It describes how harmony is achieved between different sides through modesty and the willingness to occupy a low position. The one who occupies the lower position creates the conditions for harmonious relationships. Understanding this helps to develop harmonious ties. In international relations, countries that show respect and a willingness to compromise more often achieve successful agreements. The chapter teaches us to achieve harmony through modesty and respect. Rule 62. The 62nd chapter discusses the role of the Dao in life. It describes that the Dao is the greatest treasure for the sage. It helps to find correct solutions and avoid mistakes. Understanding this helps to see the value of spiritual development. In making important decisions, guidance by the principles of the Tao can help find the optimal path, even when external conditions seem contradictory. The chapter teaches us to see the Tao as a source of wisdom and guidance. Rule 63. The 63rd chapter speaks of methods for achieving goals. This chapter describes paradoxical methods of achieving goals. To do the great, start with the small. To achieve much, do not strive for it directly. This requires a special approach to planning. Understanding this helps to achieve results effectively. When implementing large projects, it is better to break them down into small tasks, which makes the process more manageable and less stressful. The chapter suggests using opposing approaches to achieve better results. Rule 64. The 64th chapter reveals the secrets of preventing problems. It says that the sage solves problems before they arise and creates order before chaos appears. This requires constant awareness and attention to detail. Understanding this helps to prevent crises. In business management, regular analysis of potential risks allows for timely preventative measures. The chapter teaches us to be conscious and prevent problems before they arise. Rule 65. The 65th chapter discusses the wisdom of ancient rulers. This chapter describes the qualities of ancient wise rulers. They governed through simplicity and naturalness without imposing complex management systems. Their wisdom lay in the ability to see the essential. Understanding this helps develop true leadership. Modern leaders who use simple and clear management principles often achieve better results than those who apply complex systems. The chapter shows us the power of simplicity in governance and leadership. Rule 66. The 66th chapter speaks of the role of modesty in leadership. It describes that true leaders occupy a low position and serve their followers. Their strength lies in the willingness to occupy a low position. Understanding this helps to develop effective leadership. Successful managers often work side by side with their teams, helping them instead of commanding from above. The chapter teaches us to see modesty as a key quality of a true leader. Rule 67. The 67th chapter reveals the 3 treasures of the sage. This chapter describes the 3 main qualities of the sage: compassion, economy, frugality, and modesty. These qualities form the basis of his strength and influence. Understanding this helps to develop genuine strength. In business, companies that show care for employees, use resources sparingly, and maintain modesty often become more successful and stable. The chapter encourages us to cultivate the 3 treasures for the development of genuine strength and influence. Rule 68. The 68th chapter discusses the qualities of a good general. It describes the 3 main qualities of the ideal general. He does not strive for victory at any cost, prefers defense over attack, and acts through understanding the nature of war. These qualities form the true strength of a commander. Understanding this helps to develop effective methods of defense. In business competition, it is better to focus on strengthening one's own positions than on aggressively seizing the market from competitors. The chapter teaches us to see defensive actions as a manifestation of true strength. Rule 69. The 69th chapter speaks of strategy without battles. This chapter says that the best way to win is not to engage in open combat. The sage uses minimal effort to achieve his goals. This requires a special approach to conflict resolution. Understanding this helps to find peaceful solutions. When resolving disputes between employees, it is often better to use negotiation and the search for common interests than to apply authoritarian methods. The chapter suggests using gentle methods to achieve goals without direct confrontation. Rule 70. The 70th chapter reveals the simplicity of the teaching of the Tao. It describes that the teaching of the Tao is extremely simple, but people often do not follow it because of the complexity of their thinking. Its power lies precisely in this simplicity. Understanding this helps to accept the teaching more openly. In learning, the simplest principles often turn out to be the most effective, even if they seem obvious. The chapter teaches us to see strength in simplicity and be open to its acceptance. Rule 71. The 71st chapter speaks of knowledge through the awareness of ignorance. This chapter says that true knowledge begins with the awareness of one's own ignorance. The one who acknowledges their limitations can truly learn. Understanding this helps to develop genuine knowledge. In scientific activity, a willingness to admit one's mistakes and the limitations of current knowledge is important for further development. The chapter teaches us to see the beginning of true knowledge in the acknowledgement of ignorance. Rule 72. The 72nd chapter discusses the attitude toward power. It describes that the wise ruler respects his subjects and does not impose his will on them. He understands that fear of authority generates only hostility. Understanding this helps to develop harmonious relations of power. In collective management, it is important to respect employees and their rights, rather than relying on fear as a method of control. The chapter teaches us to see respect for people as the key to successful governance. Rule 73. The 73rd chapter reveals the differences between rigidity and softness. This chapter says that rigidity and violence often lead to destruction, while softness and flexibility ensure long-term success. This requires a special approach to problem solving. Understanding this helps to choose more effective methods of action. In overcoming difficulties, it is better to use flexible methods of adaptation than to try to forcibly change the situation. The chapter teaches us to see the advantages of softness over rigidity in achieving goals. Rule 74. The 74th chapter discusses the issues of life and death. It describes that those who live in constant fear of death limit themselves. The sage accepts death as a natural part of life. This helps to live more fully and consciously. Understanding this helps to overcome the fear of the inevitable. In terminal illnesses, palliative care is important, which helps patients accept the situation and live the remaining time with dignity. The chapter teaches us to accept death as part of life for a fuller existence. Rule 75. The 75th chapter speaks of the causes of people's calamities. This chapter describes the three main causes of people's suffering: heavy taxes, excessive government, and wars. The wise ruler avoids these mistakes. Understanding this helps to develop more humane governance. In modern states, it is important to maintain a reasonable level of taxes and grant people freedom for development. The chapter teaches us to see the true causes of people's suffering and avoid them. Rule 76. The 76th chapter reveals the power of softness. It says that the living is soft and flexible, while the dead is rigid and fragile. True strength lies precisely in softness. Understanding this helps to develop effective methods of action. In physical exercises, it is better to use gentle stretching techniques than to try to achieve results with force. The chapter teaches us to see strength in softness and flexibility. Rule 77. The 77th chapter discusses the principles of balance. This chapter describes the mechanisms of natural balance. What has a surplus gives to what has a deficit. The sage follows this principle. Understanding this helps to develop harmonious relationships. In social policy, the redistribution of resources from the wealthy strata of the population to the poor is important to achieve social balance. The chapter teaches us to follow the principles of natural balance in life. Rule 78. The 78th chapter speaks of the power of water. Here, water is a symbol of true strength. It occupies the lowest places, yet is capable of penetrating even the hardest materials. Its strength lies precisely in softness. Understanding this helps to cultivate similar qualities. In business, successful companies often work from the shadows, giving their clients the central role. The chapter encourages us to cultivate the qualities of water for the development of true strength. Rule 79. The 79th chapter reveals the art of reconciliation. This chapter says that the best way to resolve conflicts is through reconciliation, through generosity and a willingness to forgive. Even after an agreement, traces of tension may remain, so it is important to work on the complete restoration of relationships. Understanding this helps to develop peaceful methods of dispute resolution. In family conflicts, it is important not only to achieve formal agreement, but also to restore trust and warmth in the relationship. The chapter teaches us the art of deep reconciliation for achieving long-term peace. Rule 80. The 80th chapter discusses the ideal society. It describes a model of a small state where people live simply and naturally, do not strive for distant lands, and maintain traditional way of life. This shows the possibility of harmonious existence without complex technologies and diplomatic ties. Understanding this helps to see alternative models for societal development. Ecological settlements built on the principles of self-sufficiency and simple living demonstrate the possibilities of this approach in the modern world. The chapter suggests that we consider simplicity as the basis for creating a harmonious society. Rule 81. The 81st chapter concludes the teaching on wisdom. This final chapter says that true wisdom is manifested through selflessness and a willingness to share knowledge. The sage acts not for personal gain, but for the good of all. This helps to develop genuine wisdom. In education, the best teachers work not for money or recognition, but for the transmission of knowledge to the next generation. The chapter teaches us to see the source of true wisdom in selflessness. Overall conclusion: the second part of the Tao Te Ching deeply reveals the principles of moral development and the practical application of the Tao in governing oneself and society, offering a unique approach to leadership through modesty, service, and gentleness. It teaches us to see strength in opposites, value simplicity and naturalness, and develop qualities such as compassion, frugality, and modesty. Through concrete examples and practical advice, this part helps transform the philosophical ideas of the first part into effective tools for daily life, forming the basis for true spiritual and social development. These principles create a solid platform for harmonious existence both personally and publicly. This is such a wonderful book. I have compiled a separate list of all the important theses from this book, along with all the techniques and tools, and created a step-by-step action plan that you can immediately implement in your life. You can get all this in my community, Place of Power. There, you will find a detailed text analysis with similar lists for each book being reviewed. The community has already thoroughly analyzed and made available to you hundreds of world bestsellers with a new analysis released every day. Follow the link in the description and use it.